So for your argument against the Titus view, right? So to kind of recap that, you would have to reinterpret the 10 kings and the 10 horns into 11, which the text does not say. The other case you're making is that it makes more sense of Revelation when it's talking about Nero being the sixth king, so the sixth who was. So it seems to, if you were to add Titus there, you would fail the 10 horns analogy, and you would also not be able to make sense of Revelation when it comes to five have fallen and the sixth is. So your interpretation seems to kind of be able to make sense of all of the text put together the best.
Yeah, so I try to put everything together. And the other thing about my view is I say that, the 10 kings go up to Vespasian. So if Titus worked under the auspices of Vespasian, you could say that this is speaking of the whole time period. And this is what John Calvin actually says too. So I'm very sympathetic to Calvin's view. I think it's good. And I would say at very least, preterists ought to lean on Calvin, listen to what he says. And then if you really want to get specific and down into the weeds, then, go for it and try to come up with these other real specific things. But I think that the best explanation of the little horn waging war against the saints is Calvin. He says, thus he says it must prevail, for the Caesars and all who govern the provinces of the empire raged with such extreme violence against the church that it almost disappeared from the face of the earth. And thus it happened that the little horn prevailed in appearance and of general opinion, as for a short time the safety of the church was almost deprived of. So I consider Calvin's interpretation to be logically valid. It does seem to me that the 10 horns represent the line of Caesars from the first king Julius to the 10th king Vespasian, with the little horn being in the middle or the midst of them. Now the big question I always get from people is they say, but wait a minute, Daniel 7:24 says there's 10 kings, and that shall arise, and then another. So they really get hung up on that word another. And again, what I want to point out is that the preposition is ambiguous. It's Aramaic. It only appears one time in the entire Bible. And the other thing I believe is that after doesn't refer to the 10 kings, but it refers to the 3 kings, not the 10. One of the things that's interesting about Daniel is Daniel uses a lot of parallel structure. So when you read it in the Aramaic and the Hebrew, this passage happens to be in Aramaic, one way you could read it would be very woodenly, and just like a very literal translation. And I came up with something like this. And 10 horns from the 10 kingdom are 10 kings who shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and 3 kings who shall subdue them. Okay, so that word them, who's he talking about? Is he talking about the 10 kings or the 3? And if you notice that in the first part of the prophecy, the first time he sees the vision, the 10 horns from the kingdom is paralleled in the second part by 10 kings shall arise. In the second version of the vision, the interpretation, it's also paralleled by he shall subdue them. Okay, so who is he subduing? Is he subduing the 10? In the other parallel verses, it says he shall subdue 3 kings. That's the 7:24. So it says that in all of them. In fact, it says in verse 24, and he shall be different from the first ones, and 3 kings he shall subdue. All right, so the one that subdues comes after them. He comes after the 3 kings. So it's a little bit wonky because it's not like in linear order like you'd read it in English, but that's the way a lot of Hebrew text is. It's written in a very kind of a odd parallel structure where it's in reverse, So that's my solution to the problem, is that there's 3 kings that the little horn subdues. It's not the 10. The first one he subdues in the verse are the 3 kings, not the 10. And in verse 24, the structure is inverted. The object is the 3 kings. So he subdues the 3 kings, even though it seems like it ought to be the other way around. All right. So that's something, when people read Daniel, you have to look out for. One of them is chiastic structure, where things are actually put in reverse order at times. There are several places in Daniel that are like that, where if you read things very linearly and very literally, you're not going to get that it's in reverse order and that it's in a chiasm. The other thing you have to realize about Daniel is that when you have a difficult phrase or a difficult passage, it often means the same thing as what came right before that. It doesn't mean something different, but it means something very similar or something the same.